presenters in about an hour, a third presenters joining us online over there. So on the other screen, you'll see AJ Moriarty and Pierce Moriarty. Give them a big wave, tell them hello.
He went to go change his outfit.
Hopefully they can hear us. Can you guys hear us?
Yep.
Phil has no idea.
Pierce, how about you?
Yep.
Okay. They're going to be joining us in our presentation, and I never played in the WVC. I'm way older than you guys. But I was thrilled to see what the WVC did in my three sons' lives. Tommy will be joining us a little bit later. He's got a, oh, by the way, my name is Bruce Moriarty. Hi. I skipped right over my intro part. I would like to be the first to offer you a happy Caps Lock Day. It's Caps Lock Day today. I don't know if you do that or not. It's also National Make a Difference Day. And I need to give a shout out to Jason. And I want you to give him another hand. For 30 years, he's been heading up the WVC. Let's give Jason a hand. I say that because it's a real passion project for Jason, and he catches people in his wave of passion. And you can see when he goes through some of the history stuff, just how much it's meant to him over the years. And I can say, for 10 straight years, our family had at least one of our sons playing for the Blue Goals. Go Blue Goals! So 10 straight years we got to watch Unity Eau Claire. And it's been a lot of fun. But and these guys can speak to this as well. But the friendships they've made, Eau Claire, many years before our kids played, just a little bit more history, was kind of viewed as snarky, and they would kind of embattle other teams. And then a guy named Justin Wilkie came along, and he completely changed the culture. And that culture changed for years. It's still great to this day, from what we can tell on the outside, that instead of teams always kind of battling with each other, they would battle in a volleyball sense, but when the match was over, they'd shake hands and be friends off the court. And I'll tell you what, all three of our kids are still playing a lot of tournaments, a lot of outdoor tournaments, grass tournaments, doubles, triples, whatever, boat ride, and they're playing with and against people they played against in college, and they're great friends now. So don't take that for granted. I appreciate all your leadership in this, Jason, and catching everybody in the wave of that, because it's been a lot to my family. There's going to be a little bit of redundancy in this presentation with what Matt and Rachel just did. Nice job, Matt and Rachel, by the way. But some of the redundancy, I think, is important because these are really important points. And I don't know if you take notes on your phone, I don't know if you take notes with old school pen and paper, but there's some really good nuggets here that we want to make sure that you get down and embed it in your brain. Before we get to that, though, I need to give a little bit of a plug. I coached for 30 years at the high school level, and stepped back in 2016. And since then, I've been officiating because there's such a shortage of officials. And I'm telling you, if you want to make some extra money, get involved in some officiating. There's a QR code on the table back there right when you walk in. Scott's holding it up right now. Or you can go to any one of these sites. If you want a new club, and I'm not just talking college club, I'm talking 18 and under, 16 and under, 14 and under, 12 and under. It's typically going to be $30 a match that you get. You get scheduled for a Saturday, you'll make $300 in a day. And you can get scheduled for a Saturday, Sunday. You can do that as a college student. Just go to badgerregionvolleyball.org, and Sarah Boyd, the assigner, will hook you up with tournaments. You can totally control your own schedule. If you've got stuff going on, block off that weekend. You don't have to work that weekend. You don't have to be at their whim. If you want to do college as an NCAA, you'd go to pavo.org. That's going to be $70 if you line judge one match, $165 if you're the R1 or the R2 for one match. And there's a huge shortage right now. I just did St. Norbert the other night. Great match and a lot of fun. If you want to do high school, typically it's going to be $50 for line judging and $110 if you're the R1 or the R2. More than that if you're doing a Saturday tournament. So just a little plug for officiating. Hopefully we need a lot of officials out there. And what's great about, if some of you guys get involved in it, is you already know the game. You already know the nuances of the game. If there's a back row setter coming up on a tight pass and there's a ball that gets blocked as he or she is trying to set it, you know right away that's not a play on. Depending on the location of the ball, if that's above the net, then that's going to be an illegal back row block. If that's completely on the center side of the net, it's going to be the blocker over the net. But people that try to learn things out of a book don't understand a lot of that stuff, and they struggle with those calls. So I always encourage people that have played the game, that know the game, to get involved in officiating. All right, so AJ's going to take over right now, the first several slides. AJ, take it away.
All right. Yeah, unfortunately I wasn't able to hop in earlier, so I guess I don't know what kind of repetitiveness or anything, but so yeah, I was the president for the Oakland men's team, and just kind of, I think, talking through some things about what my experience was like, hopefully passing on anything that could be of use to anybody today. Obviously, there's always the little caveat that every school, every team is different. Some schools have one team, some have two or three. People are always in different phases, schools, teams, are all different, but kind of just talking about what I learned through my experience. I was fortunate enough to have volleyball kind of run in the family, so I personally didn't play till a little bit later in life, but had many resources that I could lean on. So yeah, kind of, I guess, keeps that in mind that everyone's experiences are going to be a little different, but so yeah, we'll hop in. And so that first one, just to be prepared, I found it useful for me to write it out, whether that's on my phone, a little piece of paper, whatever it might be. That way I kind of avoided dead time or sitting there asking, hey, what should we do? What do you guys want to do? Maybe wasting 5-10 minutes. Or, oh shoot, what was that one drill that I thought of? So kind of coming into practice or tryouts or whatever it might be. And that can kind of go towards meetings with, the recreation board or whoever. It's just having things written down to look at, to reference, whatever. That way you don't miss anything, and that sort of thing. But being prepared going into practice each night, obviously, I assume most people have 2 or 3 practices a week, different than varsity sports, high school, whatever. So you have kind of a limited 4 to 6 hours a week for practice. So not wasting time really is beneficial. And you don't have to learn like a military operation, planning every down to 5 minutes, whatever. But at least have an idea of what you're going to do at night each practice. Stuff always happens. People show up late or sick or whatever, and if something comes up, you kind of maybe change things a little bit as needed. But then at least you have 4 or 5 drills written down to kind of progress into and all that sort of thing. So I think going along with, and there's another presentation later about kind of running effective practice, but I kind of personally found it good, or whatever, to have specific drills and not just do hitting lines for 20 minutes and then playing quads for 20 minutes, etc., and then using up half your time kind of as time fillers, and all of a sudden half your practice is gone, and it's not super effective.
Okay, next slide.
So finding a balance, I think, is in any aspect of this. Obviously, I assume most of you are the president, vice president on the board somehow, leading the team. So balancing out your responsibilities as a coach, as a leader, but also focusing on your skill development on your own. And so I think, part of being a president, leader, whatever on the team is your responsibility to do what's best for the team. I think sometimes that's going to mean stepping out or maybe highlighting a couple of areas or times of practice, certain drills where you can kind of step back and, some schools have two teams, and if it's an A team, B team, whatever, somebody on the B team might not know how to run practice. You might not be fortunate enough to have somebody who can lead that second group of players. And so kind of stepping back and giving them guidance or working with whoever the team captain is there to help them run practice. Stepping on drills to focus on helping somebody who just played, especially as guys. So many of them come out and haven't played before. You might be fortunate enough to have some players who played in high school, but so you really have to kind of step back and teach the basics of an approach, all that kind of stuff, blocking forward. But on the flip side, I think that means too, what's best for the team could be focusing on what you are working on as a player. So I think there has to be a little bit of both, and that's part of the difficulty is finding what times, drills, whatever, you can kind of go back and forth on doing those two things.
Is that kind of a trial and error thing, AJ?
Yeah, I think, if you are, able to do it kind of early on in the season, and obviously that fall is quote unquote preseason or whatever, you can kind of mess around with it then. And, I was always trying to be very verbal and communication oriented, which this will slide later on in this, but just being open to, kind of feedback and, trying to work on that balance, I guess.
All right, next slide.
Yeah, next slide. So, kind of going along to a similar thought process. I found it best finding that balance was having other people help out with practices. I had two other guys who played in high school, played club in high school, all that, and were on the team, and it really helped me a lot to have them take some of the drills, take some of the practices, whatever. Sometimes it was, hey, you got this whole night, plan on, whatever, or hey, I'm gonna do this, this, and this. Do you mind working on this footwork, this passing drill, whatever, that sort of thing. So, could be, like I said, leading an entire practice, leading drills, or having maybe somebody on the A team of middle blocker splitting up by positions, and then just have somebody that you feel confident in, and they feel confident that they can kind of share, especially in those kinds of situations with someone who maybe is just, again, obviously different for guys and girls because most girls played in high school and they have a background. But for us personally, it was teaching them some of the basic things that, it's just a ground up progression that they hadn't played before. So yeah, hopefully you can find or establish early on in the year a couple of people that you're able to rotate through or, delegate certain things to.
How many of you have more than one court available to you for practice at one time? You've got two courts side by side. How many of you just have one court? Okay, I just want to make sure you're all going to raise your hand at some point. So how many of you have two teams practicing at one time, like an A team and a B team? Okay, so some of you have two teams on one court, and that's a logistical challenge, or three teams on one court. So those are some logistical challenges, and I'm going to give you a drill handout later for the next presentation with some drill ideas. But my email is on there. I'd be happy to help you, and there are also mentors that are here to help you work through those kinds of things as well. How many of you practice typically 10 p.m. or later, because that's the gym time you can get? Okay. All right. That makes for some late nights, because then your adrenaline's going for practice, and you're trying to go home and get some sleep before class the next day. All right, so you have a lot of challenges, and as AJ alluded to, and we heard from our previous presenters, the more you can prepare ahead of time, the more efficient and effective your time will be. All right, next slide.
Be a servant leader. Everyone has a different leadership style, I guess. But don't be afraid to hop in and, don't always pawn. Nobody really wants to set up nets or pick up all the balls or, whatever. But hop in there, and you know what? Sometimes things are going to change last minute, and you have to make adjustments to practice plans, and you're not going to help set up nets. Stuff happens. But it shouldn't be something that you never do. It should be something that, kind of go ahead and say, hey, every time you get here, help set up nets. If you have 10 people do it, it's going to take 2 minutes. We always just focused on nobody really wants to do it, so let's just get there, get it over with, instead of having 2 people do it and it takes 10 minutes, whatever. So don't be afraid to hop into things. It worked out best to form, that kind of expectation relationship on whatever, where it wasn't like, I'm the team president, I run things, I don't have to do that. So that was one thing that really helped us out a lot.
Real quickly, at your table, I want you to come up with 4 things that need to be done to get ready for practice. Go. All right. What's one? Shout it out. Set up nets. What's another one? Get the balls ready. What's another one? Turn the music on for some people, yeah. Depends on what kind of music you're listening to. How many of you listen to country music at practice? How many of you listen to country music at all? If you listen to country music, what's another thing? Wiping down the floor, absolutely. Some of these floors get very nasty, dirty, and rusty, and they get slippery. So you got to take care of it. And there are other things as well. But how many of those tasks are fun to do? Not a lot, right? So as much as you can do them together, or set up a schedule so that it's not the same people all the time, it really can be helpful. Otherwise, you're going to start getting some resentment. How come you're not doing this? Are you too good for this? And things like that. So that's all part of being a servant leader.
Clear goals and expectations. Whether that is, are we trying to win conference? Are we focusing on team and player development? If you have a young team, whatever. But I think it helps just to be open about it. What everyone wants to do. Honestly, some of the teams that I played against or we were friends with, whatever, their goal was having fun. And that was fine. That was what they worked on. Other teams, you want to be competitive. So kind of maybe establishing that early on, maybe that first week or 2 of practice, or in that fall season for sure, so that when you go into spring, when it actually matters or whatever. But yeah, what do you want to do? And then maybe having them write down or talk about goals as a player. What do each specific person, 3 things they want to improve on this year, or 3 goals to accomplish, whether that's player, their own development, stuff throughout conference, all that stuff.
How many of you know what SMART goals are? What the acronym SMART stands for? Specific, measurable, attainable, reachable, or time bound. I actually want you to take like 3-4 minutes right now. I don't know if you have something to write with, but I'd like you to discuss this with the group at your table, and I want you to kind of come up with about 3 or 4 goals for this year. Okay, now you can't just say, well, let's improve as the season goes on. That's not measurable, right? They don't have to be statistical goals like get 10 kills per set or something like that. We're just trying to come up with about 4 goals right now. Give you about 4 minutes. We have pens. Raise your hand if you need a writing utensil.
I think B's definitely yeah, it's kind of hard to write that needle. Oh yeah. Whiteboard, it's like easily missed. Yeah, and this date next to the date benefit. He goes to the
My friend Fred. Fred was from Scott. So you're still with apology, right? Measurement, yeah. Pull that up right there.
I remember feeling something off this mix cloud. I was like, no, this ain't right. Someone else is helping. And I was like, let it be known.
One more minute.
What's going on, man? See, how are you? Thanks for being here. This is my friend Fred.
Oh my God, I'm so excited.
Yeah. And I got another cool activity. Yes. They get cards. You remember that one where they after they come to story? Playing cards that have pictures.
Yeah, that was my goal.
You can give the team's theme. So if you want certain teams to do a certain theme, you can kind of like guide it. So I'll put them in team groups. And I'll give them a deck of cards and they got to make a story and I give them so much time to do it. And then they have to present their story to a panel, kind of like being on a game show. And they'll have to put up on the stage and do their story. Boy, it'll be awesome.
I think you're discussing something
If she wants me to yell at her, I'll try my best.
Last year, coach.
So, I taught a leadership class for 13 years in high school, and one of the things we talked about was for a group, a company, a team to operate effectively, they needed to have shared values. So, when AJ first said something about this, and Matt and Rachel alluded to this also in their presentation, you have to decide, are we here to have fun, or are we here to compete, or some balance of both? And hopefully your goals can reflect that, and you're all striving for the same things. If you have half your team is there just for the relational aspect, and the other half wants to win every tournament they're in, you're probably going to have some conflict. You have to work that out. I didn't actually take inventory of exactly what schools are here, but Whitewater, men's or women's, what's one goal that you have? Shout it out, nice and loud. Excellent, team bonding, love it. Great idea. At least, and we're going to get into that with Brian Kenny after lunch. He's got some great ideas on team bonding. Is River Falls here? River Falls, what's one goal that you have? Men's or women's, doesn't matter. Leave everything on the court. That's a tough one. It's a great goal. Is that a measurable goal? Is that specific? Can we restate that somehow so it is a SMART goal? It's okay if it's not. You don't have to have all SMART goals. I think that's a good thing to strive for. But that effort is what you want to have every single time. That's really good. Lacrosse, anybody lacrosse here? Okay, lacrosse, what's one goal?
I'm just bawling my eyes out at the meeting.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Closer as a program at the end of first semester, as in like our boys and girls programs.
Okay, awesome. Milwaukee, you got one?
We said we'd like to raise the standard of play on a competition level, whether that be in practice with our own teams or at tournaments.
Okay, excellent. And these are things that you can revisit periodically. You can reset goals. You can say, are we achieving these goals? What do we need to do differently to achieve these goals? Stevens Point, the pointers, what's a goal that you guys have?
We said no phones when we're getting water.
No phones when we're getting water. I'm telling you, I love that goal. I love that goal. Oh, Claire, you got a goal? Men's or women's? Go ahead. Shh. I know the phone won't get a lot of reaction for good reason. What's a goal? Winning in 2 sets instead of going to 3. Good. Oh, Claire, men's, did you have one?
Yeah!
All right. So just some thoughts now. So these are people involved in leadership in your clubs. You may want to do this as a whole team. Okay? So that's going to be up to you as leaders how you incorporate other people.
Sounds like some good comments. That's awesome. So there's some good questions kind of up on the slide. Obviously, I don't have to read them to you or whatever, but just some good things to think about. Team chemistry, having people on the same page, kind of goes back to some of the other things that we talked about earlier. And then one other thing that I'm going to plug in as an idea, similar to what my dad had said before, when our kind of Eau Claire's team culture, whatever, how we review changed, around a similar time, we started doing, really focusing on alumni stuff. So every spring we have an alumni weekend, where we all go back to Eau Claire, Then we'll usually scrimmage the current team, but then we'll go golf, go get dinner and drinks and all that. And I think that's really gone a long way in kind of helping promote that team culture that you guys, here for fun, you get competitive and all that, but really having that team bonding. So every year there's something to look forward to. Guys are getting contact and getting to know past members, and it even helped when we were on the team. Just kind of seeing some of the guys that came through here, talking to them about playing speeds. It turns into getting tips. It turns into everything. So one thing that Leclerc has done that I feel fortunate to be a part of, and if there's nothing for you guys now, could be something you start this year, next year, and just kind of say, hey, let's be the ones to start it. Once you get 10, 15 people coming back, and we have guys that are in their 40s that come back. So that can kind of help team culture as well. So just an idea.
It's a great idea. Of course, Whitewater came out with the goal of having some team bonding every other week. Little things like that you can do to establish a positive culture can be really helpful.
So overall, I think, I know this is the last specific slide I'm talking about, whatever, but the big thing is just communication. I personally, my biggest struggle, or one of the biggest difficulties, was I lived with other guys, and some of them were on the A team, some of them were on the B team, and it was difficult at times to kind of separate friendships, coaching, teammates, kind of some of those alleys. So kind of setting those expectations early on in the year, talking about what, coaching aspects, whatever, just when in doubt, talk. There were a couple of times that I personally got caught up and I didn't mean anything, or I didn't think of anything, but I guess it came off, was interpreted as, authoritative or whatever. So I learned pretty quickly that I had to try to really, I felt like I was okay with how I brought something up, whatever, but somehow it's, miscommunications happen all the time. So I really tried to approach a lot of things with a lot more hesitancy, I guess I don't know the right way to phrase that, but really just saying, hey, I'm not trying to control, whatever. Here's just what I think. Here's what someone else said. Here's what, whatever. So really trying to come off as kind of that, hey, we're friends. I'm on the same level as you. I'm not trying to control, run, whatever. This is just what came across. This is what I think, whatever. So anything that happens between teammates, between you and somebody on the B team, you and whoever, talk about it. We're adults. It's one of the hard things, but if you can kind of establish those lines of communication early on. I told people, I said, give me a text, talk to me after practice. It doesn't have to be in front of everyone. If there's something that you care about, something that's going on, pull me aside, whatever it might be. So that was just something that I really learned to put more emphasis on than I thought, I guess. I thought, in my mind, it was like, I'm coming off pretty clear, but things get misconstrued, stuff happens. So that's my big thing is talk, we're adults, get to the point, don't beat around the bush, but, don't be a jerk about it.
That's good. Diplomacy can go a long way. How many of you have ever been on a team that has had drama? Okay? Yes, drama is inevitable. Conflict is inevitable. And that may be somebody's on the B team, they think they should be on the A team. That may be you're running the team. You have a really good friend on the team that's a middle blocker, and there's a freshman that just came in that's better than your good friend. That puts you in a tough spot. And remember, don't do things alone, whether it's making lineups, making practice plans, or whatever. you can deal with conflict as a group as well. Because all of a sudden now, you may be stuck in the middle between your really good friend and what's best for the team, which might be playing this younger player. And there are some teams that are seniority based, older players play, even if the younger players are better. And there are other teams that say, hey, the best players will play, and we'll get people in when we can, or we'll kind of balance things out in certain tournaments. But those are decisions that you really need to make ahead of time and not get caught up in the emotion of that conflict. So the next part of this, Pierce is going to take over and talk about conflict resolution.
Yeah, can y'all hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, as my dad was alluding to, conflict is inevitable. It's going to happen to some degree, and hopefully I can talk about some things that can help you get on the front end of it, and then when it does arise, how to navigate that. So there are two different types of conflict. There's conflict between two teams. I'm sure we've all had matches when things get chippy, teams start talking through the net, things get pretty intense. And then there's conflict within your own team. And that's the one that I think is really important to focus on, because that's what can create drama that's unnecessary and can really take away some chemistry. So I'll turn it over to you guys and ask you, what are some examples of conflict between two teams?
Well, I'm just going to interject here. I refereed 3 years ago a match at the Sting Center between UW Whitewater and UW Stevens. And UW Oshkosh. And there was bad blood. And there was talking through the net. There was chippiness. And I mean, it was an emotional match. It was a very highly skilled match, but it was an emotional match between those two teams. To the point where one of the players on Whitewater was yapping through the net, so it became this game of, well, we're not going to roll the ball to your next server. We're going to go and set it down on the center line and walk away. And all of these things, and it just, so I finally had to call the captains over and say, guys, this is ridiculous. Can we just play the game? And we were able to kind of, diffuse it a little bit. But, those kind of things where you're shouting at each other between across the net, you can be better than that, right? What about conflict within your own team? Yeah, go ahead. I do. You can ask Cody Fiorito. See, there it is right there. Just that little. Yeah, okay. All right. What about conflict within your own team? What are some examples of that?
What?
You two had conflict?
Yeah.
Tell us more.
So y'all remember when I said I'm not good at communicating my first year?
It was to me.
It was very poorly done. I didn't really tell her what was going on, didn't tell her why she wasn't playing, wasn't honest with her because I was trying to be the person who was in charge of club before me. And then we
Got to nationals and sat at a
stairwell for like an hour and a half and figured it all out. And
It just took us to finally have 3 girls on the court saying, I just want to go home and I don't want to be here.
And
And
we're like,
for me to finally say something to Rachel, like, why? Then it came out at the end of the season. So, but we figured it out and now we're like good friends to this day.
That's good. Resolve that conflict. Sure, why not? All right, so we've got about right around 15 minutes. I just want to run just a little bit over that. We're going to give you just a short break before running a great practice presentation. But Pierce has some ideas
I'll try to be concise.
on conflict resolution.
So when there's conflict between teams, the easy solution is to take the high road. Even if they're getting chippy, even if they're doing things that are really trying to rile you guys up, just take the high road. And it's helpful, as AJ was talking about earlier, with establishing culture. It's helpful to establish the high road as a part of your team's culture. That goes for practice, that goes for matches, tournaments. When it's established as your culture, then it's easier to just take the high road. Another thing is being able to just focus on your own team. Get to know your teammates. Get to know how each player responds when things get chippy. You might have a hothead who retaliates back, who wants to talk smack to the other team. You might have players that let other teams getting chippy get to their head. So when you know your teammates well, then you know how to respond. And I like the quote at the bottom here. You can't control other people, only how you react to them. So again, if the other team is getting chippy, you only have control over how you and your teammates respond. When there's conflict within your own team. So another thing with establishing culture is establishing a structure that creates expectations without being overly rigid. When you have expectations, that can really mitigate conflict, whether it's practice time or how things are run at practice. Those kinds of things, when there are expectations, that can help you get on the front end of mitigating how much conflict happens during the year. I work at a middle school as a prevention counselor, and things can really blow up quickly with middle schoolers, where we've got 8 students on one side of the conflict and then 8 students on the other side of the conflict. Don't let it get to that point. The fewer people who are involved, the better. If it's just conflict, someone's got frustration with how things are run at practice. Okay, have a conversation with them, just the two of you. Pull them aside, have a conversation where they're not, other teammates aren't seeing what's going on, and maybe getting their noses stuck in the drama. When you've got conflict between 2 players, if they're competing for playing time, you can have a conversation with each of them and then a conversation with them all together. So the conflict areas that I kind of have in my head that maybe you guys can think of more, but when you're choosing A and B team, that typically can create conflict. A B team player might think they deserve to be on A team, whatever the case is. Conflict might happen with playing time. Someone thinks that they should be playing more. Conflict can happen when there's questions about work ethic in practice. Maybe you feel like someone's not working hard enough, maybe you feel like they're just being lackadaisical, and they don't want to get better. And then the fourth type I could think of was challenging leadership. If there are players that think that they can run things better or differently, those are 4 areas that I think can happen within a team that creates conflict.
How many of you have a hothead on your team? How many of you have a hothead sitting at your own table? How many of you have or have had teammates that consistently show up late? That's a lot. How many of you have teammates that drop the ball of communication? They're supposed to show up and they don't let you know they're not going to be there, and all of a sudden they're not there. All of those things create conflict, and those are all things that you want to have worked out ahead of time so that you know. And again, this goes back to what both Matthew and Rachel's presentation said and what we said earlier. Do this as a group. If you're doing this all by yourself, that's a huge burden. You're trying to be a full-time college student and play a sport and manage these personalities. It's a lot to do by yourself. So I really encourage you to have a group approach with that.
And one thing that I found helpful when there's conflict between 2 players is to have conversations with them each individually, and then if needed, have a conversation all together. Because when you have a conversation with each person individually, that allows them to express exactly what they're experiencing and the frustration that they have, and then you can hear from the other side. But when you have it together right away, sometimes that isn't a very effective way of navigating conflict. So there are 5 ways to resolve conflict, and if you've ever seen The Office, their 5 ways are lose-lose, win-lose, compromise, win-win, and win-win-win. This avoidance strategy, I think, usually is a lose-lose. That's when, there's conflict and then both people or both parties just step to the side and they don't want anything to do with it. And it's either because they're unassertive and they don't speak up for themselves, or because they're maybe too assertive and they're uncooperative with the other side. And usually it's just not an effective way of navigating conflict. And I really don't recommend this one unless there's a really small conflict that will easily just fizzle out in a short amount of time, but that's not usually the case.
I just want to point out this diagram. You'll see this in all 5 of these slides. You'll notice both axes, unassertive and assertive, and then uncooperative and cooperative, and each of these are placed. So as Pierce just said, the avoidance is people that are unassertive and often uncooperative. So just make note of that.
Competing sometimes is also not very useful unless it's specifically related to 2 players competing for a spot or playing time. And so just understand that it's, you guys know this is it's a long season, so you've got time to try things out. When you let people compete for a spot, I think that's okay to do. Unless it's, almost to the end of the year, you probably don't want to be switching up teams too much. You want your team to have time to build some chemistry. So when it comes to competing, it can work, but it has to be pretty specific to, actual playing time, or A and B team. Let them duke it out, let them play, and that way you can really see, when this person's on the court, it feels like our team just has that much more oomph, we're that much better, and that kind of a thing. The third way to resolve conflict is accommodation. It can be useful, but still might leave some tension in the air, especially if one party is unassertive. So you might have one person that kind of dominates, and then the other person is almost forced into accommodating and giving up what they want. But it can be useful. It might work if playing time is an area of conflict, or if there's already a concrete structure in place, like people are on their phones during getting a drink break, or if someone comes to practice late. Frequently, players have frustrations about dues or jerseys. These are some things that when there is that structure already in place, accommodation might just be the best route to handle that. These last 2 ways are, I think, the most effective ways of dealing with conflict. And just as a reminder, the fewer people involved, the better. So when you're collaborating, you want really just the main people involved. Some people might have conflict and they might be talking to some other friends about the frustrations they have, and all of a sudden everybody wants to have that person's back, and things can just get out of hand. You want to just have the specific individuals involved. And when you're collaborating, I think it is a really effective way to create a shared solution. You can typically when you're collaborating and you're navigating these conversations with people, one thing I forgot to mention too is you want to be a facilitator. If the conflict is within your team or between 2 people, you want to facilitate that conversation without dominating it. Because conflict resolution is a really important life skill. And if you're dominating the conversation, that doesn't give your teammates an opportunity to really come up with a solution. When you're collaborating, you can just be someone that adds in possible solutions and helping think through what are the problems, what are some possible solutions. And this is helpful when everybody's on board and everybody understands kind of the goal of that conversation. So remember, going back to creating a culture, if your culture is you want to win, then hopefully you're going into that collaborating conversation with that end goal in mind. And then the 5th way is compromising. And it's usually pretty fair, but it might not always be what's best for the team. So I think it's not effective when there's an overall loss. For example, running a 6-2 might allow for 2 setters to get equal playing time, but it might not be the best for your team. So there are times that compromising is usually fair and is helpful. But again, when there's an overall loss, then maybe that's not the best approach. And don't forget, when you're having these conversations, you don't have to do it alone. When there's conflict that arises, you can bring it back to other leaders on the team and have a separate discussion with them if things are getting out of hand, coming up with next steps. Maybe if conflict is really getting out of hand, something that you can do is just have a whole team conversation. Sit them all down at practice and talk about where you're coming from as a leader and what you're trying to do for this team. And then address the conflict. Like AJ was saying, we're all adults, we can all communicate. So if conflict really gets out of hand, then I think it might be helpful to take that step beyond just the conversation with a couple people and address it as an entire team and figure out, how are we going to move forward? What are the things that we need to do to set the trajectory heading where we want to go as a team?
Good. Thanks, Pierce. I really put this slide in there just in case we had some extra time at the end, but we're already a little past 11:30. We've already kind of talked about some different scenarios, so we're just going to end our presentation right here. What I'd like you to do now is we're going to launch right into running an effective practice, and AJ and Pierce's brother Tommy was going to join us. He's running a little bit late because he's got a regional final that he's coaching tonight for McFarland. So they're trying to win a regional championship. Had some stuff this morning to do team-wise. But between right now, running an effective practice, then lunch, then Brian Kenny is going to do team building stuff. So running the effective practice stuff and the team building stuff, we need some space right here in the middle. So I'm going to add it's going to be tricky because I know lunch is going to be served over there, so we don't want to crowd that table too much. But if we can move some tables here, so you can still see the screen, but we've got a little bit of space to demonstrate